You are listening to Survival Stories with Jacqui. Welcome, survival warriors. If you are a victim or survivor of trauma, then you're in the right place. In this show, we'll explore the extreme strength displayed by victims of trauma as they journey through life to the survival pinnacle. My name is Jacqui, and I am so grateful to be here today to share my survival with you. Here is this survival story. Let's dig deep. Hello again, survival warriors. This week I bring to you my friend Nancy Allen. Nancy has had a real roller coaster of a life, which she has happily and definitely gratefully for us agreed to share with us. It's quite a difficult story, harrowing in parts, but the hope is that it will help you in some way, help you heal, help you move on, help you to become a survivor. So without saying more, because you know I do love to talk, here, let me introduce you to Nancy, who will tell you what a fabulous person and fabulous life she has today. Nancy, over to you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Jacqui. I really appreciate being here, and I'm grateful for the opportunity that you're providing here and for the work that you're doing for all survivors. In terms of where I am today, I am a mother of 4 adult sons, 2 adopted and 2 biological. I live in Georgia in the United States, and I have lots of furry kids. um, I am a lover of big dogs in particular. I have one at my feet right now, she's in Newfoundland, and she's my. I'll get to her in a bit later, but I find big dogs to be very comforting for me, and I am usually surrounded by them. Where else am I today? I work in the corporate world where I've worked for 30 something years. I'm an actuary by training and do data management primarily. And I am someone who just likes to give back. And so I created a corporation that focuses on people like me and supporting them through where they are in primarily peer-to-peer community support. I'm happy to get into that if you'd like, or you tell me.
No, we're happy to hear all about it. We're just grateful that you're giving us your time today, Nancy. So
yeah, well, like I said, I'm grateful to be here. So I run a company that I started in 2017 called Tail of the Bell, meaning the tail end of the bell curve. And I think of it as, so if you think about the life experiences curve, most people will fall somewhere in range around that middle where it's a lot of similarities. Mm-hmm. You'll have folks at the other end of the curve who are extremely had privileged upbringing, who have, so that just that really wonderful, loving parent situation, very privileged upbringing. And then on the opposite extreme, you'll have those who are have had a lot of adversity in their life. And I think one of the most traumatic adversities to overcome is incest. And I say that because it is the most taboo subject out there. It is where people feel isolated and alone. And it is where I focus because that is my background. So if you think about the tail, of the bell curve. Again, I'm an actuary, so I think very mathematically. When you think about the tail of the bell, yeah, there's there's tail end gets thinner and thinner and thinner, and as you get to more extremes, and it's very hard at those extremes to find other people that are like you, because there's fewer of them. Number one, in theory, but with incest, it's also about people shaming, the society not wanting to hear it, And so people go through a lot of their life feeling very much different, alone, ashamed of who they are, and ashamed of what's happened to them. And that was me for a very long time. So Tale of the Bell is my hope, and really it's my passion and it's my dream to be able to reach other folks and bridge that gap, and also at the same time raise awareness about incest.
Well, I'm right with you on how incest does affect you, because as some will know from my story, I am a survivor of incest, and it does affect your life in a way that you wouldn't expect it to, but it's how you manage it. So we're really interested to hear more, please. Let's hear about your story. How did you get to that point?
So I am a father-daughter incest survivor. So for me, incest was not just an event; it was a way of life. It was my childhood, and that, I think, is the difference between incest and rape, or sexual assault, or harassment, because it's because it's happening at a very young age, or at a very developing, and two, it's because it betrays the trust of the basic family foundation. So it's forming. It happens very frequently in the formative years, and the response that you very frequently get is very different as well. So my story, I'd call it I was being groomed from early on. I actually come from a middle class, upper middle class family. My father was a podiatrist, and my mother was a nurse practitioner, so very educated. And I, through my early years, I felt very loved by my father, by my siblings, by my grandparents, and but he was a very strict man. He was a Catholic, and I grew up in the 60s and 70s, so times of the using the belt was not something that was spared, right?
Yes.
As a way of discipline. So while it was physical at times, there was also a lot of joy, but there was this dark side that people didn't know about.
Mm-hmm.
I was 13 years old when my father started to turn it into sexual. He had been ill, and I was his nursemaid because my mother was working a 3 to 11 shift. She was
Sure.
a director of nurses at a nursing home, and she was out of the house a lot. I was his nursemaid, and it turned into more than just went from back rubs to more than that. He, as I said, he was a podiatrist, and I used to work in his office since I was probably about 10, doing things such as filing, greeting patients, cleaning up the room after the patients left, that kind of thing. And over the course of about a year, it progressed with him, and I was trying to find coping mechanisms and strategies to limit exposure to him, and I was terrified. Come the beginning of the spring of it was now 1978. So I was turning 14. The spring of my 14th year, I started really becoming fearful that he had recovered from he had a heart condition, and he was really returning back to work, and I was going to be expected to be working with him one-on-one in his office, private office, in the summer every day. And I knew that he would have complete access to me. And I was terrified of that. I had a teacher pick up on behavior changes, really, because I was a very good student, because that was always my escape. And she reported it to a guidance counselor. Guidance counselor reported it to, I had a couple of sessions with the guidance counselor where I couldn't talk. He thought I might be better with a female. He reported it to her, another guidance counselor from another school,
Yeah.
who,
It's
same kind of thing, didn't
the
help.
policy of
Yeah.
the time, wasn't it? Where everybody
Yeah.
reported it to
Yeah.
somebody else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was the first year of mandatory reporting in the state of Massachusetts where I was living and from. And then eventually the guidance counselor referred me to a therapist, a psychologist who I saw with my mother, actually. She'd take me and she'd wait in the waiting room. And I couldn't really speak in there either. But one weekend I was staying over with my oldest sister, who's 8 years older than me. And she lived in an apartment above my grandmother, my paternal grandmother. And she had left, and I don't know, she had asked me why I was seeing this psychologist, and I opened up to her in a note. And for whatever reason, I felt safe, and she had always been kind of a second mom to me. And that night, she contacted me, and what she said to me, she said, "I'm sorry. I thought he promised me that it had ended with me." And so in that moment, I was absolutely devastated with, I'm not special. He told me I was special. He told me he loved me. I felt just all this mixed emotions of, because now she told me also that she had contacted the authorities, that she had contacted my uncle, his brother, his only brother, and she had contacted my therapist, and we were going in together the next day, and the intent was that she was going to get me help. So there's this, I don't know, there's behavioral betrayal, there's chaos, there's things are spiraling out of control. I can't control anything at this point. It's out of my hands. There's feeling like I wasn't what he said I was, that it wasn't what he said it was, because he had expressed it as a way of that he loved me, you know.
Can we just explore that a minute?
Sure. What?
While
You have a question?
you were, it's quite a mix of emotion there, because on the one hand you didn't want him to have access to you, but on the other hand it was quite nice to feel special. Is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how do I put this? My father used to explain his abuse or his sexual abuse to me as he was teaching me. He was preparing me for to be a mother, to be a wife, to be able to satisfy a man. It was his way of justifying it to himself, right?
Mm.
And so he would say to me that he was doing this because he loved me, and this is what good fathers did. So there's a lot of grooming going on in that, all of that, but that was throughout my early childhood. He also, I mean, my father was a Franciscan monk before he met my mother, and chose not to become a Catholic priest, but was raised very much in the Catholic religion. He didn't go to church anymore himself, but I was raised in a very Catholic family upbringing. My mother took us. So there's a lot of shame in that. And I don't know what that was with him, but with me, it just was this guilt kind of laid upon guilt in Catholicism. So in that moment of confusion, and it just, I needed to feel like I had some kind of control, and I didn't in that moment. You know?
Absolutely. Yeah. Sorry, you continue.
Yeah. So the next day I went with my sister, and I couldn't talk, but she explained to her what I had said to her in a note. And she then explained, I was sitting outside the room by this point, and she then explained to the therapist what he had done to her. And I didn't hear it, but she explained to the therapist. Then came back out, got me, and said, "I have to report this," was her response.
Could you stop there for a minute, please, Nancy?
Yeah.
We're just going to have a break. Hi, this is Jacqui, and you've been listening to one of my friends tell their stories today. I invite my friends to tell their stories to help you heal. If you do have any trauma or any difficulties that you think we could help you with, please visit my website, jacquiandfriends.com, and leave a message or contact me, and I'll be happy to connect you with either today's friend or anyone else who you've listened to or watched who you think might be able to help you further. Or if you just want to talk to me, that's great too. And we're back. And Nancy was telling us about the incest that had started with her father and how her sister had come to the rescue, for want of a better word, and had decided that she had to report it after Nancy wrote down what had happened. Back to you, Nancy.
Thank you. So it then just spiraled. I mean, the therapist called the Department of Social Services, which is Children's Protective Services or whatever term is used, but it's the group of people who are from the government that are intended to support and protect children. They called the police. I went that night and spent the evening that night with my sister, because I think that's correct. And then the social workers came and they interviewed me at my sister's apartment. And then they decided that my younger brother and sister, who were twins, who were 3 years younger than me, needed to be pulled as well. So I went with my sister to court with the social worker, and again, I've lost my voice at this point. I cannot even speak. I'm just, and I think what's going through my head at that point in time was, if I don't say anything anymore, then I won't get in any further trouble. I won't make this worse. And I remember sitting on a bench with waiting for as this all unfolds around me, and my sister coming to get me and saying that we need to find a place for you to stay tonight, because they won't let you stay with me because he has access to the apartment because it was over his mother's house. So I went with her. Again, this is the year of payphones, not cell phones, right? So she ended up calling in front of me at least a half a dozen people, including his brother, including some very close family friends. And the response was absolutely, we don't want to get involved.
And
so because they could...
that is so frustrating, because it shows you what family friend is a very loose term.
Yeah. So I'm thinking through all of this that nobody wants me because I'm bad, right? It's reinforcing that notion that I did something bad. So I ended up going with my sister. I was sitting in the car while my sister went with the police to pick up my younger brother and sister, who were at... my father was not home. My mother was away on a business trip. So my paternal grandmother was staying with us. And my paternal grandmother came to the door to the police, and I watched as they took my brother and sister with the social worker to join my older sister and I. And now I'm thinking, okay, now I'm dragging this into them too, for them as well. So just all this guilt, all of this misinformation, but you feel what you feel, right? And no one explaining it. Nobody's saying it, it's not your fault. Nobody's saying any of that. In fact, the opposite kind of being reinforced by, we don't want you. We're not going to take you in, that kind of stuff.
Yes.
It's a crime, that kind of stuff. So it's all reinforced. So I went, that night I spent with my younger brother and sister in an emergency foster care placement home. And that's a story in and of itself. I won't go there. And then the next day, I had to go to court, and they were not allowed to go to court because presumably nothing had happened to them. So I went to court, and I remember walking into the courtroom where the judge is sitting up high on a platform behind a desk or podium
Sure.
or whatever.
Quite intimidating.
Yes, it's a big room.
Yeah.
My parents and their attorneys are sitting on the right side.
Mm-hmm.
So they're just sitting there. My sister and another social worker who I had no idea who it was, because it was somebody else who was substituting for the supervisor. And I guess a children's attorney, which I hadn't met. And then we're on the left side. And then behind them were my oldest sister, who's 9 years older than me, and her husband, who had their own home. And I was brought in and asked to just stand in front of the judge, looking at the judge on my back to my parents and everyone else, and just asked to be told what happened to me. Did your father rape you? Did your father? And I have never felt so little in my life. And that incident actually, I think, has carried with me throughout my life, such that I feel very intimidated with men in power, and I have to make them people.
I just have to say here, that was such an awful thing to happen, because you were not on trial, but you were made
Exactly.
to stand there and kind of explain yourself, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
So again,
appalled.
but that's the way they did it, and this is the late 70s. Today, I've talked to a number of women and men actually who have been through cases as children in the court system. Later on they did it in. It was different, and it was videoed, and now you don't even have to face them. You don't have to face the abuser at all, and they do it where the judge is not even in the room, where the judge is listening by video. So, but that at that time, he had a right to face his accuser. Now, my father actually stood up in court and said that he had done stuff and apologized to the court. So it wasn't that he was denying it at all. So in the end, the state took custody of me and my younger brother and sister. They felt that they weren't safe. My mother lost physical custody as well, and because they didn't feel she was emotionally shut down, and they really didn't feel that she was an advocate or an ally for us, or that would stand up to him. So they didn't think that she was a fit parent at all either. And then, so the three of us were removed, and I remember coming out of the courtroom, and I was sitting on the bench there as they escorted my father out. And I was sitting with my mother, and she was sitting a few feet away from me, and he came out of the courtroom, and he turned to her, and he apologized to her. I remember him very distinctly saying, "I'm sorry," but he wouldn't look at me. And so it was just another moment of, this is horrible. Anyway, I ended up getting what I viewed as the same punishment as he did. I was pulled from the home. He was ordered out of the home. I was ordered into therapy. He was ordered into therapy. So I really felt that this was my fault. I was equally at fault. And
And
I never.
you would feel
Yeah.
like that, because if he was a decent person, he would at least have faced you too. I'm sorry, but that's so so horrid that a child should have had
So
to go through that.
you have to understand here in all of this, right? My father was the pillar of the community. He was a doctor that still did house calls. He was a doctor that still gave free care to those who couldn't afford it. And he was well known in the community. And when I would walk down the street with him, people would stop, say hello to him, and tell me, I'm so lucky to have him as my father. I mean, so there's this flip side that, okay, it's me, right? I mean, if everybody else thinks that he's God, then it's got to be me, right? So anyway, we continued. I went to lived with my oldest sister, the one that's 9 years older than me now, that's married, and I lived with her over the summer with my brother and sister, my younger brother and sister, and I had never lived with my oldest sister, so I didn't really know her. Because when I moved to another city, she stayed with my grandmother. She was like 18 years old, and I was only 9 or 10. So we never really, we saw each other at family parties and stuff, but I didn't know her. And it was a awkward summer. She had no child experience, and she was thrown into something where today I fully understand she did the best that she could do. She was 23 years old and trying to deal with 3 traumatized siblings while she was working and newly married. I mean, anyone in that situation, she was amazing given the circumstances. But as a young child, I couldn't get my head around that, right? So anyway, I stayed with her for a couple months, and then in there, we're going to family therapy that's court ordered. I'm going to individual therapy. And at some point, the state decided that we were ready to be reunified as a family. And I started high school, so that would be September, and it started in July. So I started high school back in my hometown. So it was probably 2 months that I was with my sister. And my father came back as well. The state retained guardianship for another 9 months or so. And so in theory, we were watched, right? There was visits. At one point, my father lost his therapist, and they decided to have him go to the same. So it was a husband and wife therapy, and he went to the husband while I was seeing the wife. And again, another kind of, where's the boundaries here, right?
I was going to say that's bizarre.
Yeah, exactly. And so it became this, so something that nobody wanted to talk about. It was, we're back together, stop the crap, don't do this again. Nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to hear it. It's all over. Let's move on. And clearly it wasn't over. Within 9 months of returning home, I was pregnant with my father's child. And that came out on a school trip. So again, very public. I was having significant abdominal pains, and I was taken to the emergency room when I was on a school trip with a teacher in a class. And it ended up being told that I was pregnant. I told my teacher, and I was like, I haven't even had a date. I mean, I was 15 years old and I hadn't even had a date. And I just remember his comment back to me, and he said, well, it must be the next immaculate conception. It's like,
could I just ask you something?
Yeah.
Your dad said it must be the next immaculate conception.
No. The teacher said to me.
I was going to say that.
Because I said to the teacher that I had never even had a date.
So again,
so that was his response.
That would have left you feeling like yet another person who, isn't in my corner.
Exactly. Yeah. And who was the teacher that I adored, right? So anyway, we come back. I got left at the hospital because the trip was ending and that they were going back. We were flying home. I was supposed to stay another night in the hospital. So the entire classroom left for the airport, including my teacher. And again, I felt rejected. I felt abandoned. I felt, all of that. Somehow my father arranged for me to come home that night. And so I ended up in a cab to the airport to catch up with my group. My teacher was very upset with the whole thing, expecting that an ambulance was going to meet us at the airport on the other end. And that didn't happen either. And instead I was taken on the school bus to the school and met by my father and my oldest sister, the one that was 8 years older than me, and brought home with my mother and father, and basically telling me that they would take me to the clinic where my father worked the next morning. So I went to the clinic, but that night it was another pivotal moment for me because my father was pissed off, so angry, just swearing, basically telling my mother that he hadn't touched. I remember him calling me a whore. He
Oh my
hadn't touched
God.
that whore since that the last thing. And my mother, instead of focused on me, and I'm in pain, right? I mean, I was just in the hospital. But my mother, instead of focusing on me, was focused on calming my father down and saying, his name was Francis. Francis, I'll take it to the clinic in the morning. We'll deal with this. We'll get it all straightened out. I believe you. Don't worry about it. And in that moment, there was no way my mother was ever going to stand up for me. So again, I'm alone.
How did that feel? Because
it's one of these, the more that I did, the more that people that had an opportunity to do something and didn't, right? You feeling completely alone, just devastated. It's just, in a lot of ways, it was affirmation or confirmation of what I already felt, right? So they're validating those negative feelings, that I'm at fault, that I did something bad, that, everyone is validating those feelings. And so I believed that, right? I believed that I was bad and I wasn't good enough. And so honestly, I set out to prove that I had value, that I was worthy, because I could never be good enough. So over the next, anyway, I believe that I miscarried. This piece is fuzzy. I was at my father's clinic. I don't know if I was drugged. I don't know if I miscarried. I don't know if I had an abortion. I don't know. It's just very, very fuzzy. But in any event, I lost the child. But in that moment, again, I was absolutely alone, and I would never say anything to anyone again, because it just made things worse, right? Every time I said something, it made it worse.
Certainly did seem like that.
Yeah. So, where I am today, I know that you get one shot at listening to a child. That if a child comes to you and says something, you get one shot at doing something and responding. Because if you don't, that child will never say something again.
Yeah.
And that, I had a couple of opportunities in here, and it was reinforced that way. So anyway, because of all of that, what then happened over the next number of years, the abuse continued. It escalated very dramatically. He had me with other men. He used his medical knowledge against me, and would sexually torture, is what I would call it. And it lasted throughout my teens. But at the same time, I had now met the man that would become my husband, who was going through his own stuff, completely different, but going through his own stuff. And we were like two misfits that found each other and came together in a very, very special way. And he was my outlet. Not that he knew anything, but he was my safe place. He was here's where I go. He was where I felt loved. And it was just an amazing relationship. At the same time, I knew, having watched my older brothers and sisters, because I'm one of 8, so there's 8 of us, it grow up and move on and do things. I knew that my way out was through education. That the only way that I was going to be able to financially pay for things, to be able to be independent and to be able to move on, was to go to college and move on with my life and be there for me.
Take a break there, please, Nancy. Hi, this is Jacqui, and you've been listening to one of my friends tell their stories today. I invite my friends to tell their stories to help you heal. If you do have any trauma or any difficulties that you think we could help you with, please visit my website, jacquiandfriends.com, and leave a message or contact me, and I'll be happy to connect you with either today's friend or anyone else who you've listened to or watched who you think might be able to help you further. Or if you just want to talk to me, that's great too. And we're back again, and Nancy was just telling us how she had decided that education was the way forward. A little bit like me, really, there, isn't it? Education is the way. It does wonders. Back to you, Nancy.
So education to me and studying was my addiction. A lot of survivors seek other ways of escaping. They may become addicted to drugs. They may become alcoholics. They may perform criminal behavior, all in a sense of trying to find a way and escape and acceptance. For me, I was very fortunate that I was intelligent, but also that my parents believed in education. So when I was studying, my father would leave me alone. And it reinforced that for me, that if I studied, I could, and at the same time, by studying and doing that, I had teachers take notice of me. So in a lot of ways, I became the teacher's pet, but it was a nurturing environment for me. And so not only was it my way out, which I realized, but it was also a place where I felt warmth and accepted, and I was good enough. I could do this.
Safe place.
And yeah, and math in particular for me, because there's logic, there's order. I know people think that's nuts, but in a chaotic world where I had no control, math was a place where I could be grounded, because no matter what, there was always a set of principles, there was always a set of theorems that you could prove. So that to me was comforting. So I put myself through school. I went in a co-op education program. I had a corporate sponsor who college helped me find. I did a 5-year program in 2.5 years. When I came home, because I was working 3 months and going to school for 3 months, and when on my home breaks, my father would still be there, so it was still continuing. And it actually continued. I got married when I was 21 to the only boy I had ever dated. And I had just finished school, and we ended up having 2 children together when I was 24 and 26. And it was amazing, because he was amazing. He was a stay-at-home parent, even at that age. So my oldest son is now 31, and 31 years ago, men did not stay home with their children. But that's the kind of man that he was, and that's who I was, because I needed that career kind of focus, and I was not I'd never had a role model really in terms of maternal instincts. So my husband taught me how to parent and taught me how to be a family, and those were amazing years. At the same time, this still was occurring up until it was in my mid-20s, but it didn't occur very frequently because we were now 1,000 miles geographically separated. But it was something I could not, no matter what I was a manager, I was educated, I could not, I just had no ability to stand up to my father. And so there was parallel lives is the way I would describe it. I was 28 years old. Very much, it had stopped for a few years. I was protecting my children by not allowing them access to him without supervision.
Right.
And I had a husband who adored me. And 28 years old, my father died. Then the night before he died, he was going in for open heart surgery again. The chances of him living were slim, and so there was an expectation that he might die the next day. And on the phone that night, he called and he actually said to me, "I'm sorry, please forgive me." And again, all of these emotions. I don't believe you. I didn't say anything, but what's running through my head? I don't believe you. I don't trust you. I no. And I said nothing to him, and I handed the phone to my husband, and he just basically said, she doesn't want to talk to you. But that was the last conversation that I had with my father. He died the next day. Within 2 weeks, it was like all of a sudden the two parallel worlds collapsed. And while I was a highly functioning, very efficient, very loving mother, wife, career woman, because I was an actuary and I was studying for actuarial exams, I was now this huddle of, I don't know. I didn't understand it then, but it happens very frequently that basically his death released the valve
Yeah.
that everything kind of just then came together and exploded, right? I was having nightmares of repeated nightmares of the abuse. I was having just flashbacks during the day. So it's PTSD, but I didn't know that. And I was having, I felt like bugs crawling all over you. Just really felt like my world was spiraling and I couldn't understand it. And my husband had taken the two boys out, and I was sitting on the couch and I had a bottle of pills in my hand, and I'm thinking about what I'm writing in a note. And I stopped as I'm thinking about what I'm writing in a note. And I'm like, this isn't fair to my children. I can't do this to my children. I needed a mother. They need a mother. And instead, I checked myself into an acute psychiatric hospital. And I was there for 19 days. And I finally found somebody who heard me, who understood,
That is
and
so
who would
important.
help me.
Mm-hmm.
And so and in this, right, I then had, oh my God, the title shift, right? My boss, I had to come tell him what the heck was going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
I had to tell him why I was going to be out of work. And he stood up for me in a way that he, it wasn't, oh my God, what'd you do that for? Or blaming me. He was, oh my God, how do we help you? That's horrible. So it was the first time that someone had really asked me what I needed
So
and
it's like when
supported
he
me
died,
in ways.
everything turned round and people
The world
started hearing
shifted.
your voice. Yeah.
The world shifted. And people started seeing me as someone who had been a victim, not a contributor. And so I started seeing me that way. And it took me probably a year and a half. But over that year and a half I had another hospitalization, and then I went to day treatment, and then I went to outpatient. But over that next year and a half, I had an amazing job, a boss, a department who supported me, who helped me talk to the other men in the department when I came back to work, so that they knew that I couldn't be startled, that I couldn't be. So I shared my story with all the men, and every one of them were, how do we help? So again, it was just a community embracing me as opposed to a community rejecting me. So that experience, I know it's not very common for most survivors, but that experience was another shift for me. And it set me up for 2 decades of just, I was in a great place. I knew who I was. I re-examined every relationship that I had with everyone, including my husband, because I had to come out to him and tell him that this was not just that this was going on, but that it was going on while we were married.
Mm-hmm.
We had to come to terms with that. My mother at that point, when I was in the hospital, she finally stood up for me, and she was driving 1,000 miles every other weekend to come up, and she would sit in therapy with me, and she would listen, and she opened up, and I learned that my mother was also an incest survivor from her father, and she just didn't know how to handle the situation and was just completely defeated. And so I forgave my mother, and we became friends. Eventually, she ended up moving in with me for a while before she died. But, and she was a grandmother to my children. So, again, amazing that I had that opportunity with her. And she was just another victim.
Yeah.
So for the next my 30s and 40s, I progressed up to a vice president level in the corporate world. My children, my husband and I decided to adopt 2 more children through the foster care system, which kind of I had been part of. And so we have twins that were they were 8 and 10 years younger than my older 2. So it was very interesting time, um, fun, chaotic. My older boy saw them as their toys and would teach them to do things that they would never do themselves. Like I remember
Yes.
getting a call at work that my 5-year-old son had just mooned his teacher because he was mad, right? And it and it was the older one that taught him how to do it. It was like, oh. I literally had the older boys taking the younger ones and hanging them from the chandelier and swinging them. I mean,
Oh my God.
it was craziness in the house, but it was fun.
Fun.
You know, I used
Yeah.
to say that I used to have 5 boys, right? And the one was just bigger than the others because I remember coming home one day with 4 super soakers, and my husband was like, "Where's mine?" And he he ended up outside with the 4 of them, and he had the hose. So, you know, but that to me, that's what family was. And he taught me that. He brought that into my life. And so I learned how to parent, and I learned how to be part of a family, a family that really cared about each other, from my husband, um, who was just an amazing man. But
Oh,
like I said, he had his own demons. And he was a stay-at-home father in a world where, at the time, the fathers didn't stay home with kids. And he struggled. He almost kind of had the flip side of when his children. He defined himself around his kids, and so
yeah.
when his children got to be a little older, he was struggling with who is he? What's next for him? You know, unfortunately, he turned to drinking in his later years, and he became an alcoholic and functioning, but. Uh, I was away. So by that point in time, I was 49 years old. I was a vice president of a company. He was a stay-at-home parent. Our youngest 2 were now 14. Our older 2 were still in college. One was doing his master's degree program, and the other one was in his undergrad. And both away from school, away to school from the house. And I was traveling. Um, I would work from home one week, and I would work in the company headquarters in the U.S. Another week, and I would be traveling, so I'd be 1,000 miles away. And on a week that I was traveling, there was just this crazy perfect storm situation. Something happened that night with a friend that one of my boys had over, and my my husband was drunk, and in all of that, which it's his story, not mine. So, but in all of that, he ended up dying by suicide. And it was the next morning. It was 6 a.m. and I got a call from somebody telling me something had happened the night before, and that I needed to come home. And so I started calling home, and couldn't get any answers on cell phones or the house phone. And eventually, I called back again, and one of my twins answered, and they said, "Dad's on the floor." And so they had been. I said, "Well, have you shaken him? Is he asleep? Is it what?" And he's like, "I already did that. We threw water on him. We kicked him. We moved him, and he wasn't responding." So I was at work, so I had multiple lines available to me. So I had them on the line. I ended up calling 911. If I'm 1,000 miles away, it took me 3 times to get to somebody because they kept telling me, "It's not our jurisdiction. You got to call here. It's not our jurisdiction. You got to call here." And I called a neighbor who at 6 o'clock in the morning and woke him up, and he came running down, and he tried resuscitating him. His wife took my 2 boys back to her house, but they had seen all of this, and I ended up I called my 2 boys. My he was 22, was close, or he was a couple hours away, and so he flew. I mean, he just got in the car and drove, and so he was with my twins and the dogs because the police wouldn't allow the dogs in the house. They were treating it as a potential homicide. So there was a police investigation going on now at this point. And I ended up being able to get home, but it was later in the afternoon. Again, different company, but I had my company stand up for me and say, if you can't get home, if you can't figure it out, we will charter you a plane. We'll get you home. I had the head of HR calling me that night saying, what do you need? And what I needed was to know, I was being asked, do I do an autopsy or not? And so I needed to know whether or not life insurance from the company would matter if it had been suicide or not. So did I need to do an autopsy, which I really didn't want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so she was very helpful in all that. My oldest boy, who was probably 800 miles away, ended up coming home quickly, and he arrived that night. And I arrived before that, and the first thing that I had to do was be interrogated by the police because there was an incident filed the night before. And it was just, again, just very intrusive. I just lost my husband, who was
Mm-hmm.
my everything. And it was just craziness. Um,
You're a strong woman, Nancy Allen.
I have that was probably the hardest thing. I learned to deal with the abuse. I learned that there were ways to escape. I learned that I eventually, within a year, I had somebody who supported me, and I found an outlet. I had no outlet here, and I had lost the person. We'd been married for 28 years, together for 33 years, and I didn't know who I was.
Yeah, your
I didn't
support
even know my
system.
kid's schedule because he
Mm-hmm.
dealt with all that. I didn't know, um, and now not only am I dealing with my own loss and trying to support two traumatized children who it later turned out found him seizing, didn't know what to do, and watched him die. I didn't know that at that moment. And also later found out that I had a very angry child on my hands, and he was blaming himself. And it took him a year to get out that the last words that he said to his dad was that he called him a fucking asshole. Which, it's like he loved him. He loved you. We all do, you know, things in a moment of anger or frustration or whatever. Anyway, I ended up, but the biggest and hardest thing for me in that moment was my demons came back. All the childhood stuff that I had thought that I had dealt with and put away and had been happy and thriving for 20 years, all of a sudden I was back with nightmares, daily, nightly, every time I went to sleep. I was back with PTSD symptoms, and I was overwhelmed again. And so I sought help. I went to the therapist that actually he had been seeing, in trying to help him cope with his addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And it was probably one of the best things that I could have done because, one, she was experienced and she was amazing. But two, because I was his next of kin, she was able to release this information to me. And so
Okay.
through her, I learned that it wasn't me, that it wasn't me that he was struggling with, that
Yes.
he adored me, and that the way that he talked about me to her was, she was so, what she said to me, honestly, was that she had never seen a couple so much in love, even
Oh,
after so many years of
fantastic.
marriage. So it was, yeah, it was just heartwarming, and it allowed me to really kind of focus on doing what I needed to do because my kids had already lost a parent to suicide.
Yeah.
I could not be, they could not handle losing a second. They needed
Yes.
me. And so for once again, I supported my kids, and I was there for my kids, and I did what I needed to do for my kids. In fact, I actually went out and I got a license plate, and my license plate is the number 4 and then the first initials of my 4 children. So that it was
Oh,
my daily reminder that I'm doing this because, for my children, and someday I'll do it for me, but right now I'm doing it for my children. It took me probably 3 years for us as a family to heal, and to get to a place of, it was a new normal. but it
Yes.
was a place of joy as well. And in a lot of situations, trauma pulls a family apart. In my situation, my children came together,
That's
and
good to hear.
we are a very strong family. My older boys are take on a parental type advisory role with my younger two when needed,
Hmm.
and we support each other. So they're now, my youngest two are turning 21, my oldest is 31, and my other is 29. They're all in the process of launching. And so when my youngest two were about 18, 19, I was like, okay, now what's next for me? Who am I? What do I want? And that's when I decided I was frustrated by there were no resources again, 25 years later, when I needed it again. There was no resources beyond therapy.
Yeah.
There was no support communities. I was still felt isolated. I still felt different. I still felt alone.
Because it
And
still
so for
made you feel
me,
like it's something that should stay hidden and only dealt with
exactly.
behind closed doors. Yeah.
Yeah. And although I had an amazing friend who helped me and was the person on the other end of the phone at 3 a.m. every night, pulling me out of a nightmare, I also had support from work. I had the president call me of the US say to me, don't come back until you're ready to come back. You're fine. And so I said to him, you know what? I can't afford not to work. And he said to me, we'll cover you, which who the heck does that these days, right?
Yeah, but
Um, exactly. And then, but at the same point in time, I was like, you know what? I need to be back to work. I need the structure. I need support. I need that familiarity. And so he understood that. So he said, when you come back, you tell us what you need, and we'll support you. And so I said to him, I need my cell phone with me at all times because my kids need to know that they can call me and I'm going to pick up. And if I'm in a meeting even with you and my kids call, I'm going to excuse myself. I'm going to step outside and I'm going to pick up the phone. I don't care what it's for. And he was okay with that. No, it happened once with him. And he was fine. I was presenting actually to the group of senior execs and I had a phone call and I just stepped outside and my kids just needed to know that I was on the other end of the phone because I was traveling again and it was fine. Eventually we ended up moving to Georgia, and which is where the company was located, and I was there every day. But yeah, I was amazingly lucky in a work situation where I had amazing support and understanding that I hadn't felt anywhere else.
so how long ago did you set up your service transformation?
So my husband died in 2013, and I went back to school to become a life coach in 2016. I formed 2017. I formed Tail of the Bell in 2017. And I had been all along, I'd been mentoring people one-on-one through work and just, people used to say that I had, that my teams were the island of misfit toys because it was folks that had been through stuff
Yeah.
kind of gravitated towards me just because I was empathetic and I was supportive and, I helped people build them up instead of building them down. Or knocking them down. And anyway, so I started it in 2017. And I've kind of grown a little bit in terms of, massaged in terms of how I do things and what I do. I tend to work, I have individual and group programs. And I also host a podcast, which is called Tail the Bell, which is survivors' stories, but around a topic. So I've covered things of all incest related and all incest survivors. And so I've covered things from boundaries to dissociation and what it feels like
Yeah.
um, to telling your family to sexual intimacy
Okay.
to I had but there's no taboo topic, none. I even been
Okay.
covered the feeling what it feels like when you actually physically respond and have an orgasm when you're being abused, which is
Okay.
common. No. So like I said, nothing's held back because to me, there is no taboo subject. And if we
No.
don't talk about it openly and honestly, then we don't connect to each other. And so we find our own normalcy, right? We normalize it
And
by
it
connecting with
can
each
be
other.
destructive because those feelings of guilt that you talked about earlier, those feelings of shame don't get dealt with, you know, and
Correct.
that can be really awful throughout your whole life, you know.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for having me here and
That's
giving me the opportunity to share that.
it's you've given us quite a lot to think about. But one thing's for sure, you are a strong survivor because you've had so much to deal with your whole life.
But honestly, I think as a survivor, I think it comes from within. And I think everyone is capable of it because I'm no different than anyone else. There's nothing special about me. I just gravitated towards people that were there as well, that supported and kind of stayed away from those. And I was fortunate, again, to have people that did support me later on in life.
But I, for as a fellow incest survivor, you've given me a lot to think about because I feel like you've dealt with more, even though we've dealt with the same thing. Because, like you said, there's so many different layers to
Mm-hmm.
deal with. You know, I remember one thing that I longed for, which you got in the end the night before he died, was an apology. You
Mm-hmm.
know, and the difference is, you know, when he went to court and said, "Yes, I did that." I remember thinking to myself, he's going to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he just went into court and lied, you
Yeah.
know, and paid people
Which
off
is
to
more
lie.
common. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, it just leaves so much inside you, you know, whatever they do, it leaves so much inside you because the whole act is wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
I think the
if,
biggest thing as a survivor that we have is our voice. And nobody can
yes,
take that from you. Nobody can
yes,
take it from you.
because I also think, because as a teacher, it's funny that you should mention teachers, because the teachers that I told always said to me, you should become a teacher because you know how to deal with these things and you will be able to offer support to other young people. And I felt really sad at the time because I didn't become a teacher until long after becoming an accountant. And I don't know why I did that, but I did. You know? And it's sad to know that, you know, even 40 years later, it's still happening and there's still young people who need support. So you're quite right, a voice is necessary. how
Yeah.
can how can people reach out to you, Nancy, for your help?
So I have a website. It's tailofthebell.com, and tail is TAIL, of the
Okay.
bell, meaning the bell, like the Liberty Bell, or
Yeah.
bell, a bell curve. And you can email me. That's there as well. There's a contact button on that. So I think the simplest thing is just my website to go there. And I'm very open to supporting other survivors in any form, from, listening to the podcast that's available, which is free, to one-on-one or group coaching. And I'm really starting to kick off a new process, where something in between, where I'm looking at creating a peer-to-peer community support
Sure.
by launching like a Facebook group or a discourse group. I'm not sure how yet, but really online connection between survivors, incest survivors, and then also facilitated, inexpensive closed group discussions where we'll get 6-8 people together and stay together, 3-6 months, whatever, however long we decide, but very inexpensively, just come together and have other people support that have
Yeah.
been through this kind of stuff,
Yeah.
that can talk and understand. I also do mentoring one-on-one, which is a very intimate mentoring, but I only do that usually with one person at a time, and that mentoring can last a year or so. And I find that it's just I get so connected and emotionally connected that I can't do that with a lot of people. So I limit that to probably 1 or 2 people at most at
Yeah.
a time.
Understandably. Okay, well, thank you again for
Thank
giving
you for
us your
having me
time
here,
today.
Jacqui.
This has been Survival Stories with Jacqui and my friend Nancy. And Nancy has very kindly shared a very harrowing tale with us today. If you have any comments or would like to reach out to Nancy, please, you can comment in the comments below, or she's given you her contact details, but please do so. If we can help you, it will make this all worthwhile. Thank you. This has been Jacqui. See you next episode. And there we have it, another empowering episode of Survival Stories. If you heard something today that resonated with you, please reach out at jacquiandfriends.com and download our free PDF. Don't forget to head over to iTunes and leave a 5-star review and rating. And whilst you're online, why not join our community of warriors on Facebook at Survival with Jacqui. Look forward to seeing you there.